All right, here we are again, Penny. Hello, I'm back. I just got done filming the previous video, so no costume changes here. This is real life. I don't know. I don't want to change. Anyways, so I guess I have a cautionary tale for everybody. I don't know how much I want to get into this, but I alluded to my recent family emergency in my last video, and it ties into what I'm going to talk about today, which is the MOLST. It's a word. It's not a word. It stands for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. So that's why they call it a MOLST, because that's a mouthful. And so my family emergency ties in really well to this. About a month ago, my dad was admitted to the hospital. He has COPD, and he also, on top of that, had a really bad lung infection. And so he was okay when he went in. He wasn't okay, but his condition got really bad in the hospital to the point that he was put in a medically induced coma and on a ventilator and being tube fed. So, and this was all before I knew what was happening. So I knew that I needed to go down to North Carolina and see him as quickly as possible in case we lost him. So I took off work and got my butt down there, and I didn't know he was going to be on a ventilator when I drove down there, and by the time I got down there, I was told that he was on a ventilator and he could, he wasn't awake. So that was unfortunate. It was a long drive just to be told that my dad wouldn't really even be able to see or talk to me or even know that I was there. But it was worth it just to be able to see him. Whether or not he could see me, seeing him was amazing. But of course, seeing him in that way was upsetting. But I won't get into much detail. I want to go over basically how what I'm doing tied into what happened next with him. So he didn't have a designated healthcare agent or a healthcare proxy, no living will, nothing like that, which I'm not going to blame my dad. Most people don't. It's kind of why I do what I'm trying to do, is to prevent these things from happening, and so that we all have our paperwork done and complete before emergencies happen like this. But I know that most people aren't going to do it. It's just nobody wants to think about these negative things. Nobody wants to think about death until they're actually faced with it. And that's not the time to do it. That is definitely not the time to do it. So when my brother and I got to the hospital, being the death doula that I am, I asked all the questions of, did my dad have a healthcare proxy designated? Did he have a do not resuscitate? Did he give you any indication of what he wants? Because at that point he was on a ventilator, tube fed, didn't know if he was getting better. His lungs were looking awful, and he had not only a lung infection but an entire blood infection. And it turns out which is interesting. The bacteria in his lungs were different than his blood infection. So he actually had 2 different types of infections going on. So nothing was designated, no healthcare proxy, and none of us knew what he wanted. But the doctors told us that he had 2 weeks to be on a ventilator. And after that, then his healthcare proxy, or whoever, at that point it was whoever, would have to make a decision whether to keep him on a ventilator, and they'd have to do a tracheostomy in order to keep him on the ventilator, which is putting the tube, like the permanent tube, down your throat. Like installing that tube, and you see people that talk out of it and stuff. So it would have to be that. And in his case, I know people that can live fine with one, but in his case, with his COPD and his other health issues, the doctors told me that he would be pretty much on a ventilator for his whole life if he got that tracheostomy. Or we could try to remove him after 2 weeks and hope that he does well. Remove him from the ventilator and hope that he does well. And I asked, if he doesn't do well, what do we do? And it was at that point, hospice can make him comfortable until he passes. So we had some decisions, but it came down to, who decides? Who's his healthcare proxy? Well, if you don't have a designated one, then it becomes your next of kin's problem. So his next of kin is me and my brother. So there we go. That was one issue solved. Now, think about it in your case, in your family situation. If you don't have a good relationship with your next of kin, you might not want them to decide these things for you. So know how important it is to have these things designated beforehand. So with that, my brother and I pretty much easily decided that my dad would not want to live on a ventilator. So we had 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks for him to get better, we were just hoping that his lungs healed up enough to do well off of the ventilator. So we gave him as much time, as much healing time as possible. We stretched out to those 2 weeks. And why they said 2 weeks is because after that time, the tracheal tube basically will cause ulcers and sores in the trachea after being in there for so long. Basically, it causes holes and causes the trachea to erode. So that's why they give you that time frame. So after that, then I asked if there was any documentation that's on file of his wants and, what he doesn't want, like do not resuscitate or anything like that. They said no. And so the doctor gave me the MOLST form, which I knew about beforehand, and I actually made copies of for my brother and my dad. And so I knew what was on the MOLST form, and they gave me a copy that was a pink copy, so they knew it was the official one. And that's the form where you basically say either resuscitate, do not resuscitate, do you want tube feeding, how long do you want to be tube fed for, how long do you want to be on any life support for, do you want life support? it sort of goes through those checkpoints. And I also was able to write down on the MOLST no tracheostomy, because my brother and I decided that that was a no. And if I hadn't put that in writing, us being the designated healthcare agents, if I hadn't put that in writing, they probably would have gone with a tracheostomy. But since we were there, down there, and stepped in as the healthcare agents and wrote it down on the MOLST, it's official, no tracheostomy. So they couldn't go that route. So they knew, the doctors knew what route that the family wanted. And we wanted the most time for healing, but we didn't want the tracheostomy. We wanted him to be removed from the ventilator. And long story short, this was a long story, and I wasn't even going to get this in depth, but long story short, my dad was removed from the ventilator a day or two before, like, that last day, that last deciding day before the tracheostomy. He was removed, and now it's been almost a month, and he's in rehab, and he's doing great. He is spunky, and he's not loving rehab, but he's his usual just lively self, giving the nurses a hard time. But I just want to say how important it is. And the first thing he did tell me when I was able to speak to him is he thanked me for not doing the tracheostomy. And it was a hard call. I mean, it wasn't a hard call because I know my dad wouldn't want that, but there was a moment, there was a while there of, like, not knowing if that was the only thing that was going to save him, or, if it was a different issue and you're stuck with, well, what's going to save him, or what's going to make his life painful. All these things go through your head. So that's why I am talking to you about the MOLST. It's usually something that a doctor will go over with their patients, and it's usually only given to people that have a condition that is kind of like a life-altering condition, life-limiting condition, or if they're placed in a long-term care facility, then the doctor will give the patient a MOLST and go over it with them. Otherwise, you don't really hear about this. But I want to tell people about it because it's the only thing that prevented my dad from getting that tracheostomy and being on a ventilator right now. So I would suggest, and I'm putting it in my blog post, is get a copy of the MOLST, fill it out, put it in your binder, put it on your refrigerator, so that your loved ones know in that case, like, what's nice about the MOLST is it goes over all those things. Do you want CPR? Do you want to be tube fed? Do you want to be on a ventilator? But it also says, like, how long would you want these things to happen for? So if you did want to be on a ventilator, you can tell them, I only want to be on a ventilator for a week. Otherwise, take me off. So you can designate the length of time, or specific reasons you would or would not want these things can go on there. So if you were just in a car crash and you have a really good chance of surviving for a long time, you could put that on there, like if I'm in a certain situation where you think I have a good chance, then do this. Or, if I have a terminal illness, then, I do or do not want this. So there's different cases. Also, the MOLST is used to tell emergency personnel. So if an emergency personnel comes to your house and they need to give you CPR, it's really good to have the MOLST form, because if you have a terminal illness and you don't want to be resuscitated, you're in a lot of pain and you don't want resuscitation, they need to have a MOLST form there. Otherwise, they are going to be intubating you. They're going to be giving you CPR. They're going to be doing the works on you, even though that's the last thing you want. You just want to go and go quietly out of this world. They can't do that if, somebody calls 911 or something. They have to go like full tilt on you unless you have that documentation. And the MOLST is a great, is the documentation for that. So that's something that you might want to keep on your refrigerator, in your fridge packet there, that's on hand, especially if you have a life-limiting illness and you are very passionate about not wanting to continue. This form is key to that. So it kind of works as like a DNR, if you've ever heard of a DNR form. So, even if you don't have a life-limiting illness, just fill it out. That way, a loved one, like, think about it as in my case. If I had that from my dad, I would know if he would have wanted to be on a ventilator or tube fed. But he already was by the time we got down there, and I'm very glad that he was, because I'm sure that we wouldn't have him right now. But, it's just important to think about. And I was able to put, like, right on there, do not do a tracheostomy. And so they knew that they shouldn't do that, and it redirected them into, other treatment options. So this is a very important form just to have filled out. I would, if things change in your life, I would revisit it often and just get rid of your copies and put in, give your healthcare proxy a new copy and put a new copy in all your little places that you have one. Yeah, so this is not the most fun form, but I hope I gave you an idea of like why it's important to have it and why it's important to have a healthcare proxy, because like I said, like if you don't have a good relationship with your next of kin, that is going to be who is deciding your future if you don't have a designated healthcare proxy. So just keep that in mind. Like, these things are really important, and I know we don't want to think about them, and I know it sucks, but it's really important. All right, so I'm trying to think of what I'm filming next, but I think it'll be a little bit more lighthearted. Let's see. Oh, Power of Attorney is next, so get ready for that. It won't be as long. I rambled a bit. And, oh, I wish you could see Penny. Here, I'm going to dip down the thing. Do you see my little sleeping angel? Look at the little sleeping angel here. Oh, even I put Penny to sleep. Oh, I know, these aren't the most fun topics, but I don't know. It's better to address them and fall asleep than have somebody you hate deciding your medical future for you. All right, so I'll see you when we go over power of attorney. Bye.